Hello and welcome to a new episode of Tell Muses, a podcast by storytellers, for storytellers, with storytellers, and everything about storytelling. Today we have with us Michael Kerins, all the way from cold Scotland. Hello, Michael, and welcome.
Hello, Despina. Hello, Simona. Yeah, as you said, my name is Michael Kerins. I live in Scotland, but not so cold today, although it's the end of January. In fact, it's my father's birthday today. He died a long time ago, 43 years ago, but I still celebrate it. And it's not cold today. I would think it's maybe +6, something like that. That might be cold in Greece.
Yeah, in comparison to us Mediterranean folk it is. And I'm sure that in comparison to your recent trip to Marrakesh, it must be.
Yeah, well, I was colder in Marrakesh than I was in Scotland, and it's nothing to do with the weather. It's to do with having the wrong clothes.
Oh, I see.
There's no wrong. I've worked for many years, as you might know or might remember from previous conversations. I worked for many years in Russia on the edges of Siberia, and that's where I learned the expression, there is no wrong weather. This is the weather. What you have is the wrong clothes. And
Absolutely
believe me,
right.
I had the wrong clothes.
I see. But for the moment, I would like you to please tell us, for our listeners who don't know you, who Michael Kerins is.
Well, I'm a storyteller, an author. I've written a tiny little, won a prize. I am a world traveler. I was born into a storytelling family. My father, he was a marvelous storyteller, and I remember him telling me stories in my childhood, pretty much up until the day I left the family home. And the day of my wedding, I went into what I would call the big bed, which was my parents' bed. And even though I was a man of 26 or 27, maybe by then, I still went in beside my daddy. And for one last time, I got him to tell me a story.
And do you
And
remember the
so
story he told you on that day?
none, not one. When he
Ah,
died, all of his stories died with him. But his stories didn't exist before he started telling them, and they didn't exist after he finished telling them because they were never recorded. He was visually impaired. He was registered blind. His mother came in contact with German measles called rubella when he was inside her as a baby. So when he came out, he was visually impaired. It never held him back. He had 8 children that survived. 7 of them survived till adulthood, and they were all sad when he died. He was a talented man. He had 2 trades. He was a shoemaker and repairer and a brush maker and repairer in a special factory that was made possible by the government of the time. They had special workplaces for people who were, for example, blind. They got to do these things. And it was in that place that he met my mother.
if I remember correctly, Michael, both your parents were visually impaired. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's right. So she also worked in the same place. But Glasgow at that time was probably a city of around 1 million people. It was a huge city, and people from poor backgrounds like my parents were crushed into tiny spaces. And they didn't know each other. And my mother went to school. She was educated by nuns out of the city. And her future husband was educated at home by his father, my grandfather, who was born in St. Louis in Missouri in the United States. And he worked on ships. And at that time, it was a very busy shipping line from Western Europe to the United States and back all the time. There was dozens of people leaving from everywhere, from no doubt the Regione di Napoli, the Regione di Milano, and also from Greece and Ireland and all these places. And he was back and forth, back and forth. And when the ship came into Glasgow, he met my granny and he stayed. Otherwise, I would be dead in Vietnam, I guess. That's a thought.
Could be. We never know what could have happened. Well, we had Maria Credali recently here giving us an interview, and we talked about her doing some work with visually impaired children. And then she told us about how some of the kids in the class would be blind from birth, and others who would have lost their sight during their life, and how different that was as perception, for example. Maria
Who,
Credali.
Maria Credeli, oh, she's a lovely lady.
She's a lovely lady. But that brings this question to mind. If your father never had images, what kind of storyteller might he have been? I'm sure he was great, but I mean, what kind?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you what kind of storyteller he was.
Mm-hmm.
And I would reckon that he's the best storyteller I ever heard,
Hmm.
without a doubt. But remember that he wasn't as blind as absolute darkness. He had sight. He could see things, but he had no concept of, for example, horizon. That was outside his frame of reference. But he didn't need it, you know. And I believe in God, and I believe that the creator, whoever that happens to be, when some kind of thing is removed, another kind of thing is enhanced. And we see this with visually impaired or totally blind musicians. They are magnificent. We see it with these people who have unfortunate limb loss at birth. They become great painters using their feet or their mouths or whatever. They're really wonderful. I have on my wall here some exhibits of art from not blind children, visually impaired children from Russia, where I regularly, for many, many years, up until COVID and then the subsequent conflict with Ukraine, I visited the school for visually impaired children. And I had improvised a story. The way I make up stories, I improvise it. And then I told it the next day to this school in English with an interpreter who had never heard it before. So I speak in English and he does simultaneous into Russian. And the children loved it. And the teacher asked for a copy of the story. She liked the story because it was a very tactile story. It was about how, on a piece of piping, a bird with claws will have difficulty holding on to a metal pipe, a crow, for example. And on the same piece of piping, how a seagull with big flat web feet will have difficulty balancing as well. And she liked the idea of the tactility in this story. So then I had to write the story. So I wrote the story down, and then it was translated into Russian, not told, but read to these pupils twice. So that's 3 times they've had the story, the oral presentation via an interpreter, and 2 readings via a Russian native speaker. Matthew Gabov, he was so inspired. He didn't know that there were blind children in Russia, in the city that he lived in the district where his granny was a resident. It had never been on his horizon, so he didn't know anything about that. He didn't work in that world. It's like people who are not involved with visually impaired know nothing of guide dogs, how this all works. So that little piece of work then became pieces of art I can show you in a minute. And then it became poem. And then the art was brought back here to Scotland and put on exhibition in the Storytelling Centre in the main street of Edinburgh, our capital city. This is between the castle and the palace where the Queen sleeps. So between these 2 buildings, halfway down on the left-hand side. If you've not been there, go there. I would encourage any of your listeners to go to the Scottish Storytelling Centre there. The exhibition was there, and a very famous writer, Ian Rankin, who writes the Rebus novels, he's now been knighted for his services to literature and to charity. He opened the exhibition. I had contacted him. He was looking to raise some money for a school for the blind in Scotland. I said, well, I'm trying to raise some money for a school for the blind, and I've got all this art. Why don't we sell it? Scottish people have a disposable income that the Russians don't have. And we did it. And I think we raised about £2,000 from these paintings. Certainly a lot of money for the wee tiny project that I run. So anyway, we had about this £2,000. And I said to Mr. Rankin, now Sir Ian Rankin, but then he was just Mr. Rankin, I'm going to give you half this money for your project. And he said, absolutely not. You must give it all to the School for the Blind in Russia because this is great work that these children have done. And I said, actually, that will be against the law because I've said to these people, if you buy this painting, half of the money will go to this project and half of the money will go to that project. That's how the system works. And he said, okay. give them all the money, and I'll give the school in Scotland the money, the same money. And that's what he did. And that was such generosity of spirit. So those pictures then got made into a little slideshow, a little movie, and the text was put in there in English, showing the pictures of the work of the blind children. And that ran on for somewhere between 10 and 12 minutes, something like that. And I approached a guy to put in some improvised music. Plinkety plink, plink, plinkety plink, plinkety plink, plinkety plink. And we had this little film, which we then showed to some people. I've shown it on cruise ships and stuff like that. Really great wee movie. And then my friend Aileen Kelly, she said, why don't we take some of these seasonal scenes as a calendar? So we took 13 of the pictures and made them into a calendar, one for each month and one for the cover. So we have a cover for Slate Charity, and then inside we've got these 12 different pictures. And then she said these wintry ones would be good Christmas cards. So from this tiny story of me seeing a bird struggling on a pipe, that's how it all started. I made up this story of how these two birds, who are Romeo and Juliet, but it's not a love story, they are destined not to be together, a seagull and a crow. One's black, one's white, one's got this kind of feet, one's got this kind of feet, one's got this kind of beak, one's got this kind of beak, and so on and so on and so on. One's got waterproofed feathers and one hasn't. How that happens is that's the story, blah, 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 blah. And they all lived happily ever after. You know the story for children, you know the beginning and you know the end. The bit in the middle is the story. So then once we had all of these different things, that project was pretty much exhausted. And when I was telling it in schools, Mrs. Crawford, who was head teacher at Cadder Primary School, she said, do you know what? I think this would be a very good assembly for children. And what they do in this particular school is one class, and the maximum that can be, I think, is 33. One class of children, let's say, let's for talking sake, say 25, will take this, work on it, make a little display and play on it. And then once it becomes a play, they will present it after a month to the whole school. And the story of the seagull and the crow then became a school project for the whole school. In the class, there are children of different abilities, but what you can do is you can make everybody crow. There's very few seagulls in the story, but there's hundreds of crows in the story. You could actually have the whole school become crows and have this vast colony of crows. I don't know if you have crows in Greece, the spina,
We
but
have murders of crows. Yeah, we do.
murders of crows, good. It's the same thing in Scotland. Pretty much the crow is the largest common garden bird. Like we have eagles and stuff, but not in the gardens. But big numbers of the biggest birds would be crows. And on the edges of Siberia, they were half as big again. They're not a murder of crows. I would say they're a massacre of crows because they are.
That's a good one.
Una
I have a
scherzo di
question.
parole, eh?
So go back. Let's rewind at the beginning of the story. When you first captured the thought of the plot and you told it to the kids, so the drawings they made were based upon what they heard. Is that right?
Yeah,
So the first calendar you created and the postcards after that had to do with the story of the crow and the seagull, yeah?
yeah,
Okay, they were all based around the same theme. I get it now.
yeah. There's only been one story about this seagull and this crow. I know that this is a podcast and it's going to be solely audio, but I want to show you it to explain it.
Okay. Michael will now show us some of the pictures he has in his office from the kids, the visually impaired kids in Russia.
That's the seagull and the crow. And that's by somebody, Elena Fontina, who's 8 years old.
Wow.
And this one is by Ivan Moskov, who's also 8 years old. So the pictures are of a very blue river, which is fundamental to the story. And I don't know what time of day it was set, the story, and that was never clear. So I don't know if this is a sunrise or a sunset.
Could be either one.
Yeah. And then a crow as black as night and a seagull. Oh, I'm going to go with a morning because actually I made up the story in the morning. That's when I saw this happen. So it was very, very early in the morning. So it may have been that I mentioned it happened at sunrise. So that's the spectacular sunrises you get in the Ural regions of Russia.
They're flying towards each other.
Yeah. And oh, another one of my schools took the project on as a racism story about different children being in different gangs. But what gang you should be in is the gang that suits you, not the gang that suits other people. You should not be forced into things. Pick your own pals. Don't be drawn into things. And then this one here is an element of danger comes in when the birds end up in the river. And the fish in these rivers are called sturgeon, and maybe they can be 2 meters long, and they can swallow the bird whole when the bird is in the water. Star of this picture is, of course, the fish.
We can clearly see the teeth of that fish. It looks dangerous.
That's really the point of that. And I know that that's difficult for an audio situation because I spent my whole life with my daddy and my mother giving them a running commentary on what was happening.
Do you mean to say you were explaining to them what was happening around them?
Mrs. Henderson's had a baby. How do you know? She's pushing a pram and her fat belly's gone. That's how I knew. When I was 4 years old, I could give such commentaries. So I spent my whole life as an observer, and so that's just an example of the degree of visual impairment. What kind of storyteller my daddy might have been had he not been. Now, what verb do I use here? Enriched or afflicted with visual impairment? Because he wasn't afflicted, he was enriched. And our lives were richer by having him because he was very tactile. He had to touch us. And it's very unusual in industrial cities for men to touch each other unless it's physical violence or they're drunk. And that will be the same in Greece. It is certainly the same in Italy. It's the same in Russia. It's the same in America. You know, tough guys, boys don't cry kind of thing. I am fortunate that my daddy held me, told me he loved me, and kissed me. And I do the same to my son and daughter and grandchildren and some friends as well. That's an important part of my being brought up. And I was the baby of the family.
Michael, your father used to tell you stories when you were younger and then when you grew up. And now you told us about all these work that you did with stories. When did you start telling stories? Was it just something natural for you to listen to stories that your father used to tell you and then you started telling stories? When did you decide to become a storyteller yourself?
Uh, I never decided. So when I was 7, I went to a local school. Well, we were poor people, no private education, nothing like that. It was a state school, and we had a new teacher who was brand new to teaching. And I was 7 years old, and she was in her 20s, I guess. On a Friday, she gave us creative play, and I always improvised and made up a little play about something we'd been doing during the week, Julius Caesar or whatever. And I didn't know then, but I was writing, starring, directing, and producing this play every Friday. And that woman is still alive. And for my Wee Tom books, she edits the texts. And she says, comma needed, not just a comma, an Oxford comma is needed here, spelling error, and so on. And her name was Miss Docherty. She's now Mrs. McPeak. And she's, if not 90, she's must be in the high 80s. She's somewhere up there. That would make her a teacher in her early 20s. So that was me at 7. And then I had her for 4 years, and then I went to high school. And then I had another marvelous teacher there of English, Mr. Langan, a long time since he passed, God rest his soul. He was a wonderful teacher, and he gave us stories to write. It could be a story like My Mysterious Uncle, The Bank Robbery, or A Walk in the Autumn Forest. And we had to write some essay about this thing. And then when we gave them in, he would correct them, except mine. And then he would get me to read mine out. Now, I'm a social anarchist. I kind of want to touch paint that's wet. Is this paint definitely wet? It's not wet. That sounds a lie. I'm kind of a naughty boy, and I'm a naughty man, and I'm a naughty husband, and I'm a naughty daddy, and I'm a naughty grandpa, and I'm a naughty pensioner now. I like kind of pushing the envelope. So my daddy gave us these stories, and then I went to school and I wrote about My Mysterious Uncle, or A Walk in the Forest, or A Walk in the Autumn Forest, or whatever. And Mr. Langan would then get me to read mine out. And all the boys would call me names, teacher's pet, and all this Langan's lapdog, and all this, and vulgar things as well that boys of 14 will shout at other boys of 14. And I'm not. And I hated it. But Mr. Langan said, in the future, if you want these words, you'll have to pay money for them. And it'll be good money at that. And then he would encourage them to applaud me. And that's the only time you get applause with booing is from 15-year-old boo. And then I just made up these stories, made people laugh. And I didn't know that I was funny. Nobody told me I was funny, but they laughed. But nobody ever said, Michael, you're funny. It has been said in later life. I remember quite recently, a boy said to me in one of the small towns outside of the big cities in Edinburgh, very industrial town. I was in a local primary school there doing an on-author visit. First time I've been in the school, and this boy, about aged 8, something like that, my target audience for Wee Tom books, said, "You're funny." What he said, "Thanks." He said, "No, you are funny. You could be a comedian when you grow up." And I said, "I'm 72." He said, "Yeah, I know." He had no idea. No idea. And I've had lovely compliments from children, including a wee boy who started the sentence maybe 20 times with the same 2 words. My mummy, my mummy, my mummy, my mummy, my mum, like this. I won't give it the 20 times. Your listeners will be bored. My mummy said, I have to say thank you for the stories. I want to say it myself. Thank you for the stories. So his mother has said to him, go and say thank you to Auntie for the scarf and tell her it's lovely and your favourite colour. And he's been dispatched off to say, dear Auntie, thank you for the scarf. It's my favourite colour. But the stories, he doesn't want to be told to say thank you. His heart is saying, say thank you. You know, I'm often asked, because I do adults and I do the whole range. I do special needs, I do visually impaired, I do deaf children, I do one-on-ones with vulnerable people with an appropriate adult there.
Wow, Michael, that was impressive and very courageous of that kid to differentiate himself from his mother and come and say thank you on his own accord. So, is that the audience you like to tell to most?
What's your favourite audience? It's a question I often get asked. And I think it's honest children. They are just magnificent. Magnificent. I remember a boy, a very, very angry boy of 15, who was cursing and swearing in school. And I said, you don't need to swear at me. I can tell you this right now. I am not going to swear at you. He said bad words and all this. I don't know if I can say them here. Anyway, your listeners all know the words. I said, that's okay. And I showed him a £5, a small amount of money. I said, well, see that fiver? I've been paid. So come to this or not, don't come to it. I don't really mind. But if you don't come, you won't find out about the bank robbery. And he said, what bank robbery? And I don't like touching children, but I took him by the shoulder on his jumper, and 5 minutes later, he was open-mouthed. He didn't hear the story. he saw the story.
Nice. And now
I've
that you
also had,
mentioned that, Michael, do you think it might be time for you to give us a story?
would you like the story of the seagull and the crow?
Sure, yeah.
In a land far from here, where the trees are a mile high, there was a huge colony of crows. The crows, as half as big again as ordinary crows that we see around Scotland, they are called varone, varoni in the plural. These varoni were enormous in number, 800, 1,000, who can say, but when they were flying, they flew almost like clockwork. It was very awkward for them to fly. And one crow was being expelled. You don't belong. You're not one of us. Clear off. And the crow had no understanding of this. And the crow flew away from the huge copse of trees. And as the crow flew away, it flew over fields and orchards. Some of the fields were planted with barley and others with onions. Some of the fields had been ploughed but left to rest for a year. Came to a village and a railway track. On and on and on the crow went until it came to the edge of the town. And there on the edge of the town, there was a house of a wealthy man. He had cars and equipment and a beautiful garden. And in that garden, there was a jetty made of pipes that stretched out into a very feisty river. At the end of that jetty, there was a little boat bobbing this way and that way in the water. The water was moving. And there the crow rested on a pipe, and the crow's claws were slipping and sliding and sliding and slipping. Awkward, difficult. But where can the crow go? That's all that's really there that's safe. And the crow looked along the pipe, and the pipe was long, 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 long pipe. And at the end of the pipe, there were 21 seagulls. And one seagull said, "You'll do." And they flew off. "You'll do." And they flew off. "You'll do." They flew off. They flew off. They flew off. "You'll do." They flew off. And the crow watched this until there was one seagull left. And the seagull looked at the crow. And the crow looked at the seagull. Just then, when they were looking at each other, the daughter of the man who owned this house came into the garden. The birds are intimidated by humans and flew into the air. Somewhere at the back of Crow's head, there was a kind of homing device that brought the crow back to the copse of mile-high trees. Seagull had nothing to do or nowhere to go, and Seagull followed abstractly, just following. The colony, this massacre of crows, had gone. And when the crow went there, Crow landed on the ground. And Seagull landed. Crow had the right feet for scratching. These claws were very, very scratchy. And soon they turned up worms and snails, spiders and other insects, and they had a little party. And there was lots of dead leaves there, and underneath them there was a huge world of food. And the seagull stamped its feet, and as the feet were stamped, the insects, thinking this was rain, came up. At one point, a worm was pulled out, and the seagull threw the worm, and the crow caught it. And then the friends started feeding each other, throwing and turning and cascading leaves here and throwing twigs there and turning over this and uncovering that. So tasty. And then These great big, almost clockwork wings started to beat in the distance and got closer and closer as the murder of crows came back, ready to massacre. We told you to clear it off. Why did you bring that seagull here? And they cawed this out. The seagull understands nothing of crow language. The seagull understands everything in tone. Racism is what racism is. And it's a wicked, wicked thing. Above all of this, an old crow said, "What if they breed? What's going to happen then?" And there was wickedness and nastiness and murder in the air. "Stick to your own kind," they shouted. Crow said, "You're my own kind. My own kind don't want me." The seagull was nervous of this anger and rage. So Seagull flew away and Crow followed. And this time, the back of the brain that was in charge was Seagulls. And Seagull flew over the forest and the trees, over the fields planted with barley and onions, over the field that had been ploughed and rested, over the railway track, past the village, until it came to the edge of the town where the rich man lived, and his daughter was still in the garden. So they went to the river. Seagull loved the river. These are the right feet for the river. And they splashed and splashed and splashed and splashed and splashed and splashed and splashed again. And when Crow landed in the river, Crow had the wrong feet and the wrong feathers. And Crow began to sink. The panic and the beating of the wings and the scrabbling of the feet and the squealing of the crow sent vibrations through the river, and a huge sturgeon, 2 meters long, came there. The sturgeon can swallow a dog, a small dog whole. A crow will be just a snack, but it will be a perfect snack. And the seagull knows the danger of too much noise and panic in the river. Seagull went underneath Crow and lifted Crow up. But Crow was heavy, saturated, soaked. 2 birds. And the sturgeon came out to grab them both. Seagull could not fly any higher because of the weight of this friend. Seagull went to the left, downwards, went to the right, downwards, crossed the surface of the water. And high above, out of the water, the fish splashed back, empty-mouthed, and more importantly, empty belly. Going above the surface of the water, they got away until they came up higher away from the river altogether, on the other side from where the man lived. There was several big baldy rocks, and they lay there. They lay there like German tourists baking in the sun, unmoving, unflinching, drying. They were safe there. They were certainly warm there, but there was no food. The rocks had been polished in the sun. The Ice Age had stripped them of any soil. Nothing could live there. Some moss, some lichens, something like that, but nothing to feed 2 big, hungry birds. But where can they go? They know where the food is. The food is in the river, but so is the sturgeon. They know where the food is. The food is at the bottom of the mile-high trees, but they can't go there, for the colony has returned. So where did they go? She was indoors. They went back to the pipe. And with the claws like this, and the web like that, they leant in on each other. They supported each other. They fed each other when they were hungry. They saved each other when they were in danger. And when they looked forward like this, into the water, there was no blackbird. There was no whitebird. There was only a friendship in reflection. If you're applauding this, Bina, put on your microphone.
I was.
So,
I think I like it better without the romance, just the friendship. Seems more authentic, to be honest.
you like it better with what?
The friendship instead of the romance.
This is the whole point.
Yeah.
Right. It's to do with verb endings. I don't know if you have it in Greek, but Simona certainly has it in Italian. Things have to be leveled up according to the grammar of the language. We have male birds and we have female birds, generally called cocks and hens, but we don't assign gender to their actions.
There is a third gender in Greek, which is a neutral. For example, crow in Greek is a neutral. It's neither a boy nor a girl. So it can be used like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So when I assured them that I was not going to make any gender, he never flew this or she never gave that. The only reference I made is somebody ignorant says, what if they breed? When it went to the university as part of my translation competition. I put it up for that, and then it came out as a small booklet in English on one side with the Russian children's drawings, and then you turn the book back to front, and then it's in Russian with different drawings, but that way all 47 drawings could come out like that.
What exactly did you do at the Russian university, Michael?
So I went to Russia in 2001 for the first time, and I was very impressed. Their level of education, the standard of English for these guys, they have schools that they major in English. That was at the time of glasnost, perestroika, and opening and welcoming, and they wanted to meet Scottish, particularly Scottish writers, because they know everything about Scottish writers that are all dead. Robert Burns, they have Robert Burns on postage stamps there. They have Burns suppers and stuff like that. Burns, Arthur Conan Doyle, John Buchan, J.M. Barrie, all these great Scottish writers, Robert Louis Stevenson, but they wanted living people. So I went. Ewan McVicker, I think it was with the Arts Council or Edinburgh University or something, they paid for me to go. And I just fell in love. I got the place and I laughed. But I was surprised at some of the material that they were using in these universities was older than me. It was from the time of Stalin. And it was all very, Mr. Brown goes to town and he works in an office, and Mrs. Brown stays at home and she bakes cakes. I think their name was Parker, maybe Meet the Parkers, the school it was called. Young lad Parker, he helped his daddy repair cars, and while his sister Jane helped mend socks. That was kind of the stuff, right? And of course, people don't live like that. It's a long time since people lived like that. And the material was very dull and very boring. And lots of my guys were starting to get access to the outside world. So I set up a program with a student called Nicholas Naumov, who was just a very difficult student, who in fact, throughout his career, ended up not graduating and was twice expelled from the uni. Congratulations, Nicholas. But he became a great success and is a very, very, very successful actor now, so much so that he can hardly walk in the street. So we set up a program called Kerins Naumov International Translation Competition. KN, that was it. So that was fine. And I started to recruit new writing in English to be translated into new writing into Russian. And that was words that had just completely changed their meaning, or their meaning had shifted. So words like, when I was a wee boy, gay meant happy and jolly, and then it meant homosexual, and now it means lame and old-fashioned. Who does this? One of the girls, she said to me, I can't come to the railway to see you off. I'm going to see my cousin who's heavy with child. And I laughed. She's not heavy with child. She's pregnant. And she did this. Oh my God. Looked around to see if anybody had heard me saying a bad word. Pregnant. I said, pregnant's not a bad word. Oh, she said, that's disgusting. I said, I know lots of bad words, and I know lots of bad words in Italian, Simona. Tanti, tanti, tanti. Niente per la greca. Not yet. But I said, the Prince of Wales, who's now the king, the Prince of Wales doesn't speak like this. Nobody speaks like that. And she didn't come to the party, which was that night. And the next day, I'm getting the train for 24 hours, something of the kind, from Perm to Moscow. And she's there with a little bunch of flowers and a piece of cake and all these souvenirs. And she brings this book and shows me on this book there. Cassandra's going over the hill to visit her cousin, who is heavy with child. And I closed the book and showed her Jane Austen or somebody like this. I said, the woman who wrote that's been dead for 250 years. People don't talk like that. Another word is the word super. Okay. Now, when I was wee, super meant really something special, you know. My auntie was in Canada and she bought me a hat. It's a super hat. It's really, now it just means very. The word super now means very. So it was this dilution of language, this amendment of language, and this shifting of language that these guys who were fully fluent in English, as good as you two are, had no concept of contemporary life. So I set that up. And I sewed into it a sexual health program to give them information on condom use and all that stuff. Condoms at that time were very expensive and difficult to get. Abortion was quite a popular form of contraception. Before I was 50, I set up this program. And then when I was 50, I said, don't give me any presents. I'm going to have a big party. There'll be 100 people there. Don't give me any presents. Give me a small amount of cash and unused condoms, and I'll send them out. And I did that. And my employer, I worked for a pharmaceutical company, Pfizer, they heard about this and they gave me a huge award, thousands of dollars, and a humanitarian award and a gold medal and my name and lights and all this stuff. And I didn't know what to do with the money. It's not like a sales award or something. A lottery ticket is. Other people had given me their writing, and this program had won the award. So my friend Roddy Graham said, you should set this up as a charity. So then it was set up as a charity, SLATE. And that's Scotland or storytelling, language, action towards education. If you have the language, if you have that actual vocabulary, then that can work. And we did this. We set it up. We registered with the government. We can collect money. We can take the money out of the country. We can give it to the students for the best translation competitions. And in that time, I then got involved with the School for the Blind and Home for Street Children. And we did that work for years, right up until 2019. And I took various people with me. I took my daughter, my son, my German pal, some Scottish friends and supporters, people who raised money, Ian Ferguson and so on, took my sister Rona. I think she paid for herself to go, actually. I never took her, but she came with us. And so on, that all happened. And they get to hear different voices. And that was a great thing. And then COVID came. You heard about COVID. Everybody heard about COVID. It was on the telly. World shut down. And I kept the project going through Zoom. I had this money, quite a lot of money, thousands of pounds. So we distribute that money. We use it for, nobody gets paid. So it gets used for airfares to take us there, give the live experience of the storytelling. We stay in no more than 3-star hotels. We take the bus to the university, all that kind of stuff. It's all low key. And we give the money to the students as prizes. And then in 2019, it was COVID. And then in 2020, the project was up and running when the Ukraine conflict started. And the government said that you can't give money because of sanctions, you can't give money to Russia, can't send money there. So the project is now teetering, but the university have now spread their wings. It's not just that university, it's now another university. They've been involved for the past 15 years, previous 15 years, 14 years, something like that. They've been involved for a long time. They said, we'll do the project. If you give us the texts, we'll do the project and give the students their certificates of participation and the winning translations. So that happened. And after that, I happened to be on holiday in Uzbekistan, and the tour guide said that the parliament have reduced the status of Russian as the first foreign language to be taught in schools. The first foreign language to be taught in schools will now be English. And it's the same for our neighbours in Kazakhstan. So I contacted people at the universities there through Liz Weir, the storyteller in Ireland. She knew some people who put me in touch with some people. I met them, and that was the previous year. It was 2023. So in 2024, I actually went there, and we're going to set up the project there, and hopefully the same thing in Morocco and Turkey, where I have contacts. This year, Despina, I asked you if you had university level students on Greek, in Greek, who were doing English at a high level, because it could go to them as well, because there's no restriction on giving prizes, because we had the status of the charity changed. And I'm going to change the Scotland part of that title of the project from Scotland to storytelling language action towards education, because that really is what we as storytellers are. We are primarily educators.
Yes. In Greece, it's kind of different concerning the foreign languages, because students at a very early age, I would say 15, 16 tops, they have finished with the highest certificate they can get in any language. And then when it comes to university students, some of them might refresh their English if they want one particular certificate to get into one particular university. So
Right.
that might lead to some classes. But usually, if they are not studying language, if they're not University of English Literature, they will all have been done by the age of 16 at the most.
Wow. Well, there it was a pedagogical uni. They were teaching the students to be teachers of English. So that's a different kind of group of people, and also translators. So it was pedagogues and linguists. And then at the other university, which joined a couple of years later, the woman there, Alexeyevna Aristova, she wanted her students to be involved in it because that was a polytechnical university and they had no floral language at all. Everything they had was technical documents or instructions or formula and stuff, but they had no metaphor. They had no opportunity for linguistic excellence. That was a very interesting part of my life. So this has been changed again. KNITC, Kerins Naumov, is out. It's not about me, it's not about Nicholas. It's now Knowledge Now, KNITC. So we will give up-to-date writing in English that can be translated.
Can you think of any particular examples of people who benefited from these programs? You personally, I mean?
I met a boy who's escaped from Russia. He's now in Germany, I think. I've lost touch with him really, but when he was a student at the Polytechnical University, he asked me if he could tell me a story in English. And I said, sure. And he told me a story. And I said, that was very good. Who told you the story? I wrote it. I said, in English or in Russian? I wrote it in Russian. I said, well, if you write that up for me in Russian, I'll put that into the competition, next year's competition, from Russian into English. We did that. And then we've done that several times. And the last one that was in from Anatoly Gorovenko, that I'm still in touch with, he's in Perm still. He's out of danger of going to the Ukraine because of his work. He wrote a story of a man having a conversation with his father by text. 9:58 I phoned you last night, but there was no reply. All this kind of stuff, right? And then 10:02, sorry, I was away from my phone. 10:07, the thing is, I wanted to ask you, blah, blah, blah. And it's a conversation between the two people in the form of typed text. It's really quite cute layout.
So how exactly does this work, Michael? Where do you find the texts? Can people send you their work?
The only thing I'm not keen on getting is I refuse all work from people who are not native speakers, madrelingua. I've learned something today, grazie Simona. If English is not madrelingua, the mother tongue, I don't take it. And I'm not keen on poetry because it's so difficult.
You have to be a poet in order to be able to translate poetry, I think. Only poets can do that.
I think so.
Maybe you'd like to end this interview with a little tale of wee Tom's? What do you think?
Once upon a time, there was a wee boy who had 5 names: Thomas, Patrick, James, O'Neill, Thumb. In lots of stories, they call him Tom Thumb. If we were French, we would call him Tom Pouce. If we were German, we would call him Daumling. If we were Russian, Ukrainian, Estonian, we would call him Malchik Spalchik. Doesn't matter what we call him. He's wee, but he is not a midget, a dwarf, a fairy, a goblin, an elf. He's not a sprite that pulls his underpants over his trousers and flies through the air, because he can't. He's an ordinary person just like you. One day, he was with his uncle. Now, his uncle is called Uncle Dan, and in my books, the uncle is such a big guy, you don't see all of him. You'll only see his shoulder or his hand or his ear. He's massive. And his heart goes boom, 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 for he loves wee Tom. And this time, this is the first time I'm just making this story up for you, Simona. So this was in Italy. This story happened in Italy. And Uncle Dan can do everything. He can tightrope walk, he can juggle, he can fence, he can make cakes, he can write poetry in foreign languages. He's even in Greek, I think he could do that, Despina. He is a clever, clever, clever man. And the two of them are on holiday in Venice. They're actually at the beach, alla spiaggia vicino di Jesolo, quite near there. So it's a lovely place that they're there, and they go into the city of Venice by Vaporetto. And wee Tom is in his uncle's pocket, and they're at the front of the boat, and they're getting splashes like this, and it's great fun, and it's just really lovely. And then they go all around, and they see all of the ancient things in Venice, but it's wet where it should be pavement. And where it should be road, it's just boats. And wee Tom said, Uncle Dan, is this city sinking? Sinking? And he started to go right inside the pocket. Sinking, 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 sinking. Oh, that's what they say. That it was built a long time ago, and it was built on marshes. And yeah, so when the waters in the Adriatic Sea is different, or the water comes on the river from the mountains, then yeah, this place is yeah, it's dangerous. And they went into St. Mark's Cathedral, and they saw the wonderful things in there. And then they came out and they looked around. And Uncle Dan said, 906,014, 9614 pigeons in that square. And we said, 9,614. And none of them my favorite number. Uncle Dan, my favorite number is 5. If another pigeon comes, Uncle Dan said, then it'll be 9,615, and that will end the 5, and that will make you happy. And they looked around for another pigeon to come, and they didn't see one. And then Tom said, Uncle Dan, how do you know there's 9,614 pigeons in there? I said, it's very easy. I count their legs and divide by 2. Smart idea. And they looked around and they wanted to have a little drink. Wee Tom has a little drink, maybe of orange juice. Uncle Dan has in Italy, he always has an espresso, just one a day, and always before 11 in the morning. Otherwise, he's up to high like this the whole day. So he just has a little coffee, espresso. So they go and sit in this cafe, and Uncle Dan says, I'm glad we're only having one thing here because this place is not very expensive. It's not very, very expensive. It's not very, very, very expensive. It's your favorite number, me, Tom. It's very, 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 very 5 times expensive to sit in this cafe. And they had to look around and they walked over this famous bridge that went up and down like that. And they saw the Bridge of Sighs and they saw all these different things. They saw the Rialto. They saw all these wonderful things. And then they saw the boats. Not the Vaporetti. No, 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 no. The gondola. And Tom said, Uncle Dan, can we go in a gondola? Uncle Dan said, oh, sure. Why not? We are genuine tourists. And they went onto the gondola and they sat back. And there's a man there and he's got stripes like this. And luckily for me, Tom, he had red on because I need to be wearing red. Just lucky for you, Despina, you asked me this because I have one of my socks is red today. Yeah, a red. I always wear red things when I'm telling me Tom stories because it's absolutely essential. So that's marvelous. The guy's got this red thing on. He's got a hat and he's a very big, big guy. And he pushes the boat and the boat goes. And he pushes the boat and the boat goes. And Uncle Dan is explaining that this boat has no engine. It has no sail. It has no rudder. It has no oars. It just has a pole. That's amazing. Can you do this, Uncle Dan? Could you do that? Because you're a big guy. Uncle Dan said, well, I suppose so. He said, ask the man, ask the man, ask the man. Now, because I told you, Uncle Dan can do everything, including speak Italian. Signore, posso operati di gondolo, per favore, per 5 minuti. Tom's favourite number is also 5. Can he get a shot of this boat for 5 minutes? Can I get a wee shot of this boat for 5 minutes? And the man said, sì, senza problema. No problem. When they were round the corner, the man and Uncle Dan changed places, and Uncle Dan pushed down in the boat, and the boat moved. They pushed down the boat, and the boat moved. They pushed in the boat down, and the boat moved. And then wee Tom said, Uncle Dan, go and ask the guy if I could get a shot of this boat. Can I try the boat? So Uncle Dan can, yeah, why not? No problem there. Signore, mio nipo, chiamo Tommaso, no, oui Tom, non Tommaso, oui Tom. Per favore, operati di batto, per favore, di gondola. Senza problema, sir, very, very, very big voice because there's no other gondolas there. They're round the corner and they're going like this. Wee Tom pushes down on the pole. Uncle Dan sitting on the boat. The man sitting on the boat. The boat moved. Wee Tom pulled the boat, pulled up on the pole, pulled up on the pole, and his knuckles went shiny and shiny and shiny, and he pulled on the pole, and the pole didn't move. The pole was stuck in the mud, but wee Tom was not strong enough to pull up and he was left dangling like this. And the boat went further and further. So wee Tom is hanging for his very life above this polluted lagoon. It's dirty, it's stinky, it's dangerous. The problem is if he falls in there, not that he'll drown, it's he'll be poisoned. That's the problem. Do you know how he was rescued? Ask me another time, because that's another story for another day. That's the end of Wee Tom's Prima Visitore d'Italia.
Wow, Michael, that was not a cliffhanger. That was a pole hanger. It is.
Every single story of Wee Tom has a cliffhanger ending.
It was wonderful. I loved it, having famous character of stories come into the real world, let's say, our
Well,
world.
the thing is that the Tom Thumb exists everywhere, but this isn't Tom Thumb. This is a Wee Tom, and he has quite eccentric behaviors. I'll send you 5 things about Wee Tom you don't know if you want to get them. His name is always written in red. It's always one word. Wee is not an adjective. Wee Tom is his name. It's always written in lowercase. It's always written in a smaller size font from the rest of the text, and so on and so on and so on and so on. So they are utterly charming stories. And one teacher said to me one time, "This is a masterpiece because, Michael, I've been trying to get socialization into these children for 2 years. And, well, Wee Tom does it."
You can imagine starting just
It was
from
a
this story.
Wee Tom and the bank robbers, and Wee Tom witnesses a bank robbery, and he sees this old granny getting bashed to the ground, and the thieves run away with the money. And later on, he engages with the police. When that happens, the teacher was reading the story, not telling the story, but reading the story from the book. They bought a class pack of the books for the school. That this boy said, "Grassing wee bastard." That Wee Tom is a shit for engaging with the police. And that's because in that part of the city, these children have a very negative attitude to the police because of their parents' experiences. And because their parents have negative experiences with the police, that gets devolved down to the children. So she was able to then stop the reading and then have a discussion about what was fair and unfair. All the children agreed it was unfair to bash the granny to the ground. Everybody agreed that. But they didn't all agree that it was wrong to rob the bank because they don't know what a bank is. There's no bank in their area. There's an ATM at the local shops. There'll be a cash line, but they'll charge people money to take out their own money. That's not a free service for these people. So they have a very negative attitude to banks, who are robbers anyway, and they have a negative attitude to the police. So she then used that as a socialization lesson. I think it was a Catholic school. Yeah, it's a Catholic school. It was St. Roch's, and the children had already done their sacramental presentations. They had made their first confession. They were taught what was right and wrong and so on, but they didn't necessarily see that as right and wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, Michael, this has been wonderful. I'm really going away from this conversation with lots of ideas, lots of images in my mind of all the wonderful work
What are you
that
going to do with it?
you've done. Oh, I don't know. I feel inspired, to be honest. Listening to all that you've done throughout the years, I feel inspired to try and do more myself.
Are you a storyteller, a teacher?
I am a teacher and I'm a storyteller, yes.
What age children do you teach?
I teach from 3 years old to whatever age. I teach English and Italian, so
Maybe I should come online and do a wee Tom program for your children, give them some work based on the story.
would be nice, yes.
If you think about it, you have my email address, email me and we'll set something up.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you very much for giving us your time, Michael, and your stories.
You're welcome.
Have a great day then.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Michael. Bye.
Bye.